2030. Commissioner Nelson has called in and said that he would be a little bit late, so we will go ahead and get started without him. Would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Should give a little overview of the agenda.
Thank you. Could we have the roll call, please?
Commissioner Wren?
Present.
Commissioner Leland?
Here.
Chair Wilson?
I'm here.
Commissioner Lambert?
Here.
And Commissioner Nelson?
Not yet. We have an acceptance of the agenda.
I'll move to accept the agenda.
Second.
We have a motion to accept, a motion and a second to accept the agenda. All those in favor say aye. Aye. None opposed. At this time, if anyone in the audience would like to bring an item that is not already on the agenda before us, you will have a brief time to speak. We cannot take any action on it at this time. Seeing none, we will move on to our agenda. Snellings.
Good morning, Chair Wilson, members of the Commission. Tim Snellings, Development Services Director. Have with me Chuck Thistlethwaite, Planning Manager, Dan Breeden, Principal Planner, Tanya Sundberg from Design, Community, and Environment, our lead consultant team, DC&E. Tanya's representing DC&E today and helping us with notes for the meeting. Also in the audience to help with discussion later on regarding the Alternatives Evaluation Report, we have several department representatives: Paul Goslin from the Department of Water and Resource Conservation, Doug Fogel from Environmental Health, Steve Fowler from Fire, and Sean O'Brien and Stu Adele from Public Works. They're great resources, and they were very helpful at the public workshop back in March when we started this discussion. And as we go through the Alternatives Evaluation Report, you may have some specific questions that they would be best suited to answer. You have a copy of the agenda. Just highlight a few things, just go over it briefly. I'll give a basic overview of where we are and how we got here. Have opportunity for questions from the Planning Commission as well regarding anything to do with what we've done to date. The time period from 10:30 or so, we were planning on an opportunity for the public to comment, and it would be essentially about an hour and a half potentially of public comment from the public's perspective about this process to date and input that they'd like to give to you at this point of your processing of the information. Today is really an introduction from a staff perspective of all the work that's gone on to date. You may recall that our process concluded with the Citizens Advisory Committee last night. So there hasn't been a lot of time for us to assemble all of that information from the 5 meetings that the Citizens Advisory Committee held in order to arrive at their decisions, their recommendations, which were unanimously approved and agreed to be forwarded to your commission for review. So we had a very lengthy, productive experience with the Citizens Advisory Committee, some excellent discussion and debate, which is really what this process is all about. And they did complete their work last night and forward their information to you effective starting today, but more so really for deliberation and discussion on your commission's part on the specific study areas. That would be the focus of the meeting on May 30th. Today is really an information meeting for you, for us to orient you to the process to date. Dan Breeden will cover this afternoon the Alternatives Evaluation Report. And where's that? Oh, sorry. The Alternatives Evaluation Report as well will be this morning. And then this afternoon we'll give you a synopsis of the actions taken by the Citizens Advisory Committee. And then we wanted to have another opportunity for public comment after that in case the public wanted to weigh in on that. And lastly, we'll have a discussion with your commission about how to prepare information for the kind of discussion that you want to have on May 30th. so that we can best equip you for the discussion about study areas, so that we can gather recommendations from you about each of the study areas that we can forward on to the Board of Supervisors for their discussions on July 29th. If necessary, we have kind of penciled in a third Planning Commission date if that's needed. And do you know the date offhand?
No, I don't.
Yeah, sometime in June.
June 20th, I believe, is the date that
Right.
we were hoping your commission would be available.
So that would be a date that we've penciled in, and we hope works for you. We think it does. We're hopeful that we might wrap this up on May 30th, but in case you can't or want some more time to discuss it, that date is penciled in as well. So with that, I'll get right into the overview of where we are to date. And so today is Planning Commission's study session on workshop series number 4. And this is the timeline that I've just talked to you about. May 30th would be your second opportunity. July 29th is the Board of Supervisors. We do have another meeting kind of running on a separate track happening on June 5th to talk about the organization of the general plan. And that would be a meeting that the Planning Commission might be interested in attending. That meeting location has not been set yet, but that's to discuss the development of a draft outline for Butte County General Plan 2030. And that's where we discuss about optional elements like a water element, an ag element, a sustainability element, things like that. And different ways that other jurisdictions have organized their general plans. We'll have some individuals from other counties where they've adopted water elements, and it will help to give some insight about why Butte County might want to consider that, and the context of their process of why they did it the way they did it, what's working, what's not working. So we think that will be an important discussion. That will help us be prepared for the start of Workshop Series 5, which starts in September. And that's the discussion about policies and the development of general plan policies. And we need an outline to begin that process. Not that it will be written in stone, but it's the starting point really to begin the process of policies and then marrying the policies with the preferred alternative. You can see the Citizens Advisory Committee meetings we held to date. We held them geographically in 3 different locations, and we discussed the study areas relevant to those specific geographic areas. So when we were in Paradise, we talked about Paradise, Pines, Magalia, the South Paradise area. When we were in Oroville, we talked about the South County study areas, all the way down to Gridley, Biggs, Bangor, Palermo, as well as around Oroville, up in the foothills. That was a very lengthy discussion. North County, we discussed those study areas around Chico, south of Chico, Butte Valley, Durham, and then we held the May 1st meeting. The intent of the May 1st meeting was for the Citizens Advisory Committee to evaluate the individual work that they had done in each of those 3 previous workshops. It was their first time to look at the collective work and also to reconsider other previously considered study areas and see if they wanted to reopen any for further discussion, and they did end up reopening 11? 13. They reopened 13 study areas for further discussion, which happened on May 1st and also last night on May 8th. And they did make some changes in their votes on a few of them. So you see our Planning Commission and Board schedule as well. Work products so far. A lot of work has been done. Started off with the City County Summit Workbook back in January of 2007. The Guiding Principles document, which came through your Planning Commission and was approved by the Board of Supervisors. A briefing book, which gives what we call the 70,000-foot view of Butte County. It's kind of a general synopsis of topics of interest about Butte County today. A key issue summary, that's from Workshop Series 1. The Setting and Trends Report, which is 1,100 pages of information establishing really the baseline for Butte County. That's the on-the-ground report of information about the status of Butte County today. What's the status of government services, of water? We have 100 pages of water information in that document, and it's divided into many chapters. Final land use and policy and transportation alternatives prepared and approved, also reviewed by your Planning Commission, approved by the Board of Supervisors on November 27th. And then most recently, the Alternatives Evaluation Report, which analyzes several constraints relative to each study area and alternatives. And again, Dan will talk about that in more detail. The team working on the general plan, you can see the staff, design, community, environment, and then their sub-consultant team. We have an excellent team assembled for this project, and the work continues to roll on. We have a lot of these sub-consultants are working very diligently. We are planning, actually, if you look at the lower right, a joint study session with the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors. I believe that's on July 22nd at 1:30 p.m. I'm not sure that if you've been informed of that or requested to attend that, but that's penciled in as well. July 22nd, 1:30 p.m. That's a board meeting date. And the intention of that is to receive a report from our sub-consultant team at Galloway Consulting, as well as have Fish and Game present, and just to review that information. It's new information that we have as a result of our study. It's similar to what was done in the previous effort on deer herd study, but it's more refined information. And so we think it's going to be very helpful to policies that will be developed in the new general plan. As you can see, these are the existing chapters or elements of our current general plan. The required elements go back to the 70s. As I've mentioned before, our land use element is, I believe, the oldest in the state, and that's one of the reasons that this general plan is being, this process has had so much support, because everyone is really on board that we need an updated general plan, and really a comprehensively written and updated general plan. These are the optional elements that we currently have in place. Something very important in the discussion are these population projections, and these were actually developed in concert. The city's planning staff, county planning staff, and BCAG and LAFCO really met and worked through these numbers quite a bit to develop what we felt were sufficient numbers for and realistic numbers for growth projections through the year 2030. If you can notice on here, you'll see the total projected population increase is 104,000 to be added through the year 2030 to the county population, including the 5 cities as well as the county. The unincorporated estimate is about 24,000, and that's reflective of the actual growth rate that we've seen in the county over the last 20 years. So that's where that came from, as well as the Department of Finance numbers, as well as we were looking at building permit history and things like that. Yes.
Are those projections assuming the existing boundaries of the cities, or does that include annexations as well?
This would include annexations as well.
Okay.
So are you using then the urban limits or spheres or
Well,
for
it's.
cities?
I think that comes into play further in the discussion, and as we talked about study areas, and for example, in the conversation with Chico, you can see from this one, if you look at dwelling units, for example, this is a dwelling unit snapshot. Chico projects their increase will be about 20,000 new dwelling units over this next 20-year period. Well, Chico did their own analysis and said that inside their existing city limits, they have a capacity for about 10,000 dwelling units. Therefore, by definition, that other 10,000 is going to come from the county. So as we talk about study areas, we need to be mindful of which study areas are greatest candidates for annexation to the cities. And
yeah, because I'm thinking about it in terms of, we want to accommodate a certain number of dwelling units in our plan.
Right.
So according to this, we would have to accommodate an existing county land, not only the 10,000 that's projected to remain growth areas, but the 10,000 that Chico's going to swallow up.
correct. We would need to be planning for that with Chico, and we are.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's a perfect analogy, because it's the same around Orville too. And Orville's a little different picture because Orville's sphere is so large It's very opposite of Chico. Chico's sphere is relatively small to their jurisdiction. As you can tell, in Orville's sphere, they do have existing capacity in their existing sphere to accommodate future growth, and then some. Chico does not have that situation, so their sphere will need to be expanded.
Okay, one question on that unincorporated area. Does that take into consideration the units that the unincorporated area would lose as they're being annexed into the cities and still have a 1.1% growth?
Yes.
Thank you.
Sure. So these growth numbers are what we're using. These are numbers that the 5 cities, the county, that we've agreed on. These are numbers that the regional housing fair share allowance numbers will, the affordable housing numbers will be based upon, things like this. So they're important numbers that you kind of lock in, 10,000 dwelling units, 25,000 people approximately, 24,000 people added in the unincorporated area of the county through the planning period 2030. Now, since these numbers were first developed about a year and a half ago, the economy is somewhat changed. So they may be a little high, but again, this is what we're using for planning numbers. We know that things go in cycles, and so from a planning purpose and perspective, we're all using the same numbers was the idea. So as Orville's doing their general plan and completing their general plan, Chico's in the early phases of their general plan, these are the numbers that they're using as well, which is good for consistency's sake. Different roles people play in the process. The public plays a very important role involved with a lot of the meetings. We get a lot of great public input. We get comments on our email, web forum conversations, written public comments at public meetings in a couple of different forums. The Board of Supervisors, as we know, is the ultimate body that will approve the general plan. The Planning Commission, you have that unique perspective of being very familiar with the zoning ordinance and the implementation of a general plan, so you bring a very unique perspective to the process. We have a Water Commission that is, delegated a certain role by the board, and they bring important information to us. My staff, other county departments play an important role. Outreach to the cities, school districts, state agencies, actually special districts as well. Very important part of the mix of the dynamics of planning a new general plan. And we've had various outreaches. We meet with the cities. We have a committee that meets with 2 representatives of each of the cities to continue the city-county coordination efforts that started back in January 2007. And that's one of the guiding principles is city-county coordination cooperation. School districts, we've spoken to the school districts, superintendents, Citizens Advisory Committee, their role as a diverse representation of the county representatives. We have 34 members on the committee. I think actually about 32 are active. And they bring a perspective that is, again, very unique, being members of the public. They have each has their interest, their expertise, their bias, if you will, and that bias is part of the mix of the community that's helpful to a good public discussion and debate. Our consultant has a lot of experience, and their sub-consultants that they bring. So again, we have a very broad group of interest that is helping and you might say complicating, but certainly helping us create a public process, public participatory process, develop general plan. Okay, actually I'm not going to go through all these in detail. A lot of meetings with the Citizens Advisory Committee. Our workshop series process, just a reminder to everybody, we have 8 meeting series in order to achieve a new general plan, a new zoning ordinance, and the EIR. And each workshop series, meeting series, starts off with a public workshop, then goes to a Citizens Advisory Committee. We found that it's not just one Citizens Advisory Committee, it's several. Planning Commission then takes over in the process. You have your discussion, formulate your recommendation on the product, forward your product, and all the information prior to it arriving to you then goes forward together with your information recommendation to the Board of Supervisors. The Board of Supervisors then chews on it and makes their decision. And that's the process. We've gone through 3 workshop series. We're in the workshop series right now, the development of the preferred alternative. What's coming next is the creation of the goals and policies. Some have talked to us, and we get some criticism that we're backwards. We should do goals and policies first before doing the preferred alternative. We've had that discussion. That was a conscious decision made by the board at the recommendation of our consultant. And the basic idea was that by doing the geographic discussion about the preferred alternative, it's actually easier for people to have a discussion about what their policy ideas are by looking at a map. It's a little bit fuzzy for people to just talk about goals and policies without talking about a geographic area. So in either case, it's a chicken and egg thing. When we complete the goals and policies, that's where we marry it with the preferred alternative with the land use map, and we can make any corrections that need to be made there before we go ahead and draft the general plan. So it all, in my view, gets washed out, comes out in the wash, and we'll have essentially preferred alternative and goals and policies.
Going back to 4 after 5, because the preferred alternative in many cases is going to say that we're going to have some conflicts that are going to come up, and
right. I think that
kind of saying, okay, now we have to go with policies. Maybe we need to go back to 4 again.
I think that 4 will be refined through 5, and that's what leads us to 6, if that makes sense. And I certainly hope that's the case, because I think that we will see some conflicts as we develop the goals and policies. We'll go back and say, gee, this preferred alternative selection may not be consistent with the goal and policy that we've developed here. So, and that'll be a very interesting, good discussion. The general plan elements then get drafted in Series 6. The housing element, we're looking at how to maybe integrate that in some of the other workshop series. We did a housing element update, 4 years ago. 5 years ago?
2004.
Okay, 4 years ago. And then last workshop series will be the zoning issues. And of course, this gets the most difficult at the end when we get to zoning, because zoning is where really the rubber meets the road, parcel by parcel. The changes that may occur through this effort become very clear in a zoning map, a zoning code. And that will be a very, very challenging step for all involved. So you can see here's where we are in the process today. We have some work ahead of us. This year is going to be a very busy year. We anticipate starting the goals and policy discussion in September of this year, and getting to a draft general plan, maybe towards the end of this calendar year. We've had a lot of outreach efforts with the city, coordination with the city, and they're really partners in this process. And it's critical that we think of the relationship that we have with the cities and the opportunity. And as I describe it, we can partner with the cities or we can compete with the cities. And from a good planning perspective, it's better to partner with the cities. And unfortunately, what happens is, in this last bullet, is that money, the issue of taxes and revenue, drives a lot of land use decisions. We spent a half of a workshop with our Citizens Advisory Committee talking about the fiscalization of land use. And I bring up the example of the auto mall. If Roseville Auto Mall called me and said they want to locate an auto mall somewhere in Butte County, do you have any suggestions about where that should be? And every city says, yeah, we know where it should be. It should be in our city limits. And that's because an auto mall generates a lot of sales tax dollars for a jurisdiction. But again, if you let sales tax dollars drive your planning, you don't always end up with the best planning. And we have a lot of examples of that throughout California. And so it would be better if we had a way to figure out how to share the revenue so that each government entity had its service needs met. And then we located businesses in the best location from availability of services and from a good planning perspective. And so that's the challenge in discussing things with the city, each of the cities and the county. And the cities, everybody's short on money, so it's a very difficult time to have a discussion about revenue sharing. But as we talk about revenue sharing, what we're talking about, what staff is talking about, is new development and sharing the revenue on that new development that would be annexed from a county to the city. And so that our services, the services that we provide to residents of the cities, would be funded if all the growth goes into the cities and the county still has to provide those services, but has no revenue stream. You know, libraries and law enforcement from district attorney and variety of social services and things like that we have to provide whether you're in the city or the county. So that's a big issue, and that discussion is happening again on a parallel track. The county administrator's office is in charge of that discussion with the cities. But I think the policies, and you're going to see policy discussions throughout the information that you'll be seeing that will tell you the Citizens Advisory Committee was concerned about this issue. And, you know, they could feel a bit of the tug and pull about an area should annex to the city, but still the county should be made whole. And they don't know how to make that happen, and that's what a revenue sharing agreement is all about. The guiding principles, you're familiar with these. We have 13 guiding principles. These are the topic areas. They're listed in detail in the back of the briefing book. These have been very helpful in the discussions that the Citizens Advisory Committee had. Since we don't have the goals and policies drafted already, this is really the guidance that we have from a policy perspective so far that could be used in the discussion about study areas and whether a study area should retain its agricultural designation or is a good study area for a change to industrial or some other use, as an example. And you can see it's not a perfect world because a lot of things are in competition with each other. You might have an area that's environmentally sensitive but has great economic potential. So that's the tough work ahead of you in discussing study areas.
And that really, I mean, I know that in the schedule, policy is after the selection of the preferred alternative, but in analyzing the 31 study areas and choosing among them, we're really making policy decisions. Mm-hmm. We have constraints evaluations for all of these, but in deciding which is either good or bad or which is better than the others, we're really putting a priority on some criteria over others. You know, maybe we think one commissioner thinks avoiding losing agricultural land is more important than economic viability. Well, that's a policy decision.
Right.
So, I think we really are making policy decisions inevitably when mm-hmm. we're selecting a preferred alternative, right. And I think that's a discussion we ought to have, and it'll come up probably on the first first study area that we look to, but we'll let that happen, I guess.
Right. I agree. We've seen that happen so far as well with the Citizens Advisory Committee, that as they're discussing the geographic areas, they're really formulating policy. And that's really kind of the idea of this, is that it's easier to formulate your policy around a geographic discussion than just to try to come up with a policy in thin air. So that's the basic idea that DCNE had. The briefing book, you've all seen the briefing book. This is a great tool to hand out to people, to educate people briefly about Butte County, a lot of information about history, the key issue summary. We went out to the 20 different community meetings throughout the county and met with citizens and listened to them. And what do you like about your area? What don't you like? What do you want to see changed? What don't you want to see changed? And that led to a lot of information that is rolled into this process. The economic summit, again, the concern early on that was identified about, what's the future economy of Butte County going to be? We don't really have an economic strategy in Butte County. And through the general plan development process, it's one of the work products or the outcomes is to develop an economic strategy. And, we don't know yet what that will be, but we got some good information, some ideas from other jurisdictions at that summit. The Setting and Trends report, you can see the 19 chapters, these topic areas, a lot of great information. If anybody's writing a grant, for example, this is great information about Butte County that you can use about the Butte County today. And this is a vital piece of information we need for our when we do the environmental impact report. So that's why this document was written. Gives a lot of information about building activity, development activity in the past. So, and you're all familiar with that. You have that document. The final land use policy and transportation alternatives, that's been developed through the process. That will actually get used in Workshop Series 5. The The alternatives evaluation report, these are the areas analyzed in the alternatives evaluation report. And again, I think this is going to lead us right into Dan's discussion. Go back. Here's a map showing the 34 study areas. You should be pretty familiar with these study areas at this point, and you'll become more familiar today and on the 30th. We have 3 study areas that include incorporated cities. So you might hear us refer to the county has 31 study areas. That's the unincorporated study areas. But again, we're trying to get our numbers to match. So as I mentioned earlier, those population projection numbers of the 44,000 new dwelling units, well, that includes the cities. And since we know some of that city development is going to come from the county, we have to be mindful of the city's efforts as well. So again, and I think that's healthy. I think that's good that we're not doing our planning in a vacuum. We're doing it in concert with the cities. Not that we're going to always agree with the cities, but at least we're communicating effectively where we can. The roadway alternatives, again, we'll have this discussion in Workshop Series 5 along with the policy discussions. Talked about the community outreach that we did. We went out to all the many different unincorporated communities. We have 42 unincorporated communities in the county, and we went out and spoke at community meetings, listening, and it was really a wonderful experience. And I think for people to see Butte County, to hear the plans of a new general plan, that we were there to listen, that was, I think, a very good step in the process for us to do. It was difficult. It was a lot of work, but I think, again, it laid a very good foundation for the effort that we're undertaking. The alternatives evaluation report, here's the constraints that were analyzed, and that's the what? Huh? Yeah, and Dan will cover this in just a second. Our general plan website, people aren't familiar, buttegeneralplan.net. Lots of information there. We try to post meeting summaries. All this information that I've shared is on the website under the completed general plan 2030 products. If you want to keep track of the Citizens Advisory Committee, there's a link there on the website. We have a web forum that people can click to and go post comments. We also have an email newsletter that we send out in advance of meetings. On this right side, under meetings, there's a place where a person can enter their email address and be subscribed to a listserv, and then they'll be automatically notified of upcoming meetings. We have about 470 people on that list, so we send an email out to one email address, and it blasts out to 470 people. That's a very efficient way to communicate to everybody, so that's why we do that. So I guess with that, if you have any questions of me, I'd be happy to answer them. Otherwise, I'll turn it over to Dan. Okay.
You want to open up the public comment on this item?
No.
Okay.
So any questions? No? Which ones? Go ahead. Just
Good morning, Planning Commissioners. Dan Breeden, Principal Planner, Butte County Department of Development Services. A little bit of history on this document to start off. We, in our original contract with Design and Community and Environment, we knew we wanted to analyze the alternatives that were developed. And what we built into that at that time was an analysis of the fiscal, agricultural, and transportation topics. As we developed the process and moved through it, we had a number of folks, including the Citizens Advisory Committee and comments made by planning commissioners, indicate that they'd like to see some other topics added to that. So essentially that's what happened. The board approved a contract amendment to include a number of other topics, and I'll go through these here shortly. This increased the size of the alternatives evaluation report itself considerably, and okay, and we distributed this to the Planning Commission as well as the board, the Citizens Advisory Committee. We made CDs available in March of this year. It's also posted on our website, and it's really a tool that is used as this process has focused on the deliberation of the Citizens Advisory Committee on the 31 study areas. It's summarized in a way that allows you to look at a lot of summary information, or you can go into a lot of detail about each study area. In fact, it has a chapter devoted to each study area that talks about each specific constraint area. So it allows the user to compare ratings for each alternative in each study area. One thing we should note is it's not intended to evaluate all the topics at a site-specific level of detail. So it's not an environmental impact report, which you're probably familiar with, a focused environmental impact report where we get a lot of detailed information on a specific subdivision or development proposal. It's more at a programmatic level, which is a general plan level. So we don't have that level of detail, but it does, given that, include quite a lot of detail about each of the study areas and their constraints. This is some of the individuals and departments and resources that were used in developing the Alternatives Evaluation Report. This report was put together by Design Community Environment with the help of their sub-consultants, Bay Area Economics, Fear and Peers for transportation issues, Jones and Stokes for biological and cultural resources. Also, a number of county departments were utilized in the review of this document, and they contributed heavily with regard to the information contained in it. So the evaluation topics themselves divided into these areas: economics, and each study area is identified and assessed for each of these topic areas. We added additional information for water resources, concerning water services and groundwater recharge. And also the report includes information contained from the Habitat Conservation Plan being performed by the Butte County Association of Governments for critical habitat and other protected lands. And so there's a lot of mapping in this report that identifies the study areas, overlays the constraints on those study areas separately, so you can see where the different constraints lie in relation to each study area. And I know you've had an opportunity to look at this for some time now, and are probably pretty familiar with it. But for each topic area, we have a grade scale, A, B, C, D, or 0. The 0 denoting just that there is no applicable rating due to no conceivable impact due to that specific development or non-development. The ABCD score is a ranking, with the A as the highest score for each topic issue and D the lowest. Again, they're aimed at comparing alternatives for a given study area. It gets difficult to assign a overall rank for each study area. That's not the intention of the report. It's more or less to get a judgment of how each study area lines up with an alternative. And that concludes the review of the Alternatives Evaluation Report. One thing that we should point out is that the score of a D doesn't necessarily mean that it's a constraint that cannot be overcome by a developer or a landowner in some way. It's just that constraint, given at that level of information, shows up as something that needs to be resolved. It's not necessarily unresolvable, but that's a constraint that is identified and disclosed within the report itself. And I'm going to open it up to any questions that you may have about the Alternatives Evaluation Report.
Dan, the A, B, C, or D process, then it said or 0. So am I to assume that the 0 would be just not applicable, or is it not even in the ballpark?
Yeah, it's just not a not applicable rating.
Okay.
Mine has more to do with the A through D. So what the concept is here is, I mean, if you have a D, you should be thinking in terms of maybe this isn't going to work, and you're saying maybe we shouldn't think that way. But there really needs to be some kind of a goal or some kind of a policy and shape. I'm just thinking of, say, some development in the foothills, and you know that your fire rating is going to be a D. Well, you're not looking at that very positive. You should be looking at that saying, hey, you know, that's not going to work unless we're going to have a fire station up there, and I don't. How are you dealing with that? To me, that's where the goals should almost come in first. What are you trying to accomplish before? You see where I'm coming from. I'm wondering now. I'm starting to wonder again whether we did get this in reverse. But anyway, we're not there now. So how would you start? How would someone like the commission start dealing with some of these issues when they have 2 or 3 or 4 C's and D's that we're dealing with? We should be looking at that in a very negative manner.
I would recommend that as staff, that this is the tool to utilize for your assessment, and that if you do see D's across the board in a lot of topic areas, that is telling you something very clearly, that there's some problems with that area that could be unsurmountable, but not necessarily in all cases.
No, it seems to me every piece of ground is going to have some good parts. It's going to have some high scores and some low scores. I mean, if there was a proposal that had all A's, it would have been developed already, probably. The reason we're here is because we've got to accommodate growth, it seems to me. If we had the choice of just building a fence around Butte County saying no more people, you know, that would be the preferred alternative, but it's not. We've got to accommodate growth. So the reason you deal with properties that may have some D ratings or C's or adverse impacts is because you have to. What's pushing this is you've got to accommodate new growth. So the way I look at this is we should first figure out how much new growth we have to accommodate. Anticipated growth is either 10 or 20,000 new units. You probably want to have more than that at some number to give people choices and, you know, margins for error. And then you'd go down and you'd have a comparative process. Where are the best places available in Butte County? And you'd use the alternatives evaluation to answer that question. But that answers Chuck's question of why would you deal with a property that has C's and D's? Well, it'd be because you have to, because you got to put people someplace. On the other hand, if you can accommodate all the growth you need with projects that have no C's or D's, then that's where you ought to approve, that's where you ought to target growth at the general plan. What this process provides that our usual process doesn't is the ability to look comparatively at different areas in the county. Every other permit we look at is, here's the project by itself. Is it good, bad? Can you mitigate the adverse impacts? But it's always in the context of a decision having been made at the general plan level that this is where this kind of growth wants to go. And we've taken that as the premise. Here's the one chance we have to say, well, maybe that isn't where we want growth to grow. But I think to do that, we need to look at some target of how much growth do we want to accommodate in terms of dwelling units. And then we can look at this alternatives report and say, well, maybe it should go here, not here. This is a feasible project, but we have we have 40,000 or 50,000 units accommodated already with better areas, so let's push this off into the next general plan. So I think and one of the questions I'm working up to when you're done, that came up early, is do we have an evaluation of what kind of growth we're looking at? Has the Citizen Advisory Committee looked at that and said, here's what we ought to look at in terms of number of units for the next 20 years?
Right. That was that table early on, the BCAG information about the 44,000 dwelling units countywide, 10,500 in the county.
Well, that's expected growth.
Right.
But the question I had is, that's the minimum. But the question I have is, how many should we look at accommodating to
Right.
certainly cover the growth that we're going to have, but also figure some people, you know, in that area may have land that we've targeted for growth, but they just don't want to subdivide and build houses. Right. So you need some level higher than that, but I think that number is, you know, what we need.
We have what the CAC came up with. We're kind of interested in what you come up with. as well. And we can show you what the CAC came up with, and we have that for you later today, actually. So they came up with about 1.5 times, having accommodated potential available land for 1.5 times what is needed. That's about what they came up with, both on the job side and on the housing side. And they actually ended up with about a 1-to-1 jobs housing balance.
Okay, that makes sense to me.
Okay, I'm going to ask the question. Maybe it's a policy thing that comes later, but is there anything that's been discussed, for instance, that you should start from the city and work outward and or around the fringe of a city urban area and then work outward? And if so, then when does it become, how far out before it becomes leapfrog or?
Well, that was a lot of the discussion that we had with the CAC in the 5 workshops. You have an area that is adjacent to a city, but it may have environmental constraints. You have an area away from the city that has great highway access, but now it's far from the city. So that's the competition of factors that you wrestle with. And, the policy, you're right, we will, I expect in Workshop Series 5, have the policy. We already kind of do about trying to develop in existing urban areas. That's sort of taken shape as a policy already in the discussion with city-county coordination. But again, that's kind of connected to the revenue sharing discussion. And what if that doesn't happen and the county needs a plan? How is the county going to survive and prosper as well? So again, you have a lot of competing factors. And I think the task for you is to take all that into account and give it your best shot.
How are you dealing with services? I mean, obviously it costs a lot more to service the rural areas. A lot of the Ds, Cs, and Ds that we saw were some of these far out areas that are being served at the same price as the more urban areas and very inefficiently.
Right. It is.
That's where the goals and policies here come in, because maybe some of these places could be accommodated for some use, but I mean, the cost is prohibitive. It's not worth it. It shouldn't. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be the rest of us subsidizing people that want to go live out on the fringe.
Right. One of two things has happened. Either you'll see Ds for scores for public services, or there's an expectation that they would provide for their own services. The project is at a scale large enough where it could provide, sufficient fire, law, and other service resources as a result of their proposed scale of project.
I think too the alternatives themselves, lend a theme to each alternative. The existing general plan as it is and what it is, and then 2 is the city-centered growth, and 3 is the more dispersed growth in the county. And those are general themes, and we have observed the Citizens Advisory Committee looking at those themes, making adjustments, and also making brand new alternatives based upon aspects of each one. So I think, Commissioner Nelson, your question kind of runs towards what major theme do you want to have in terms of development in the county, more the goal side of it. But our alternatives also kind of lend itself to determining a goal and how you want to have a land use pattern in the county.
See, I'm going to look at a C and a D, and I'm going to say no, and somebody else is going to say, well, what if we pay our way? What if we pay for everything? I mean, then you have a whole different scenario. You now have changed the C to maybe something that's closer to an A or a B. Okay. You're making it more interesting.
So we're going to go back to the old Wild West where the communities would ban and get together and hire their own sheriff?
Oh, no. And it looks like the alternative 1, 2, and 3 are essentially going to be different for every. I mean, potentially, from what I look at in the Citizens Advisory Committee report, everything is kind of different depending on the area. And one scenario in one area is a different scenario in another. Is that where we're going right now?
Well, what I would say is that early on, I think there might have been a hope that you might see a recommendation from the CAC that for alternative 2, which is sort of the urban area growth. But in fact, that isn't what happened. In some areas, the existing general plan was what they would recommend. In other areas, they saw the justification for some rural extension. And so, and in other cases, as Dan mentioned, they came up with an alternative 4 or 5, which they ended up recommending. So there is no straight down the column recommendation that, yeah, this is going to be a city-centered, urban-centered, focused general plan. At least not yet.
In the long run, is the majority of the growth around the urban fringes? It is, isn't it?
I think
I think we could take a look at that and provide
You haven't
you
done
with
the numbers
information. Yeah, I don't think we've had the
Yeah.
opportunity to do that since we just finished up last night. But I think that would be an important tool to kind of take a picture of where we're at with the Citizens Advisory Committee recommendations and what overall theme has evolved in terms of a land use pattern of their decisions.
Well, economically for the county, that's going to be about the best way to, I mean, we're going to probably want to get as much of that development around the urban cores where it can be serviced more efficiently. Not all of it, but at least a large portion of it. That should be what we're striving for, to try to keep the county healthy in that.
as long as there's revenue sharing. If not, then you're just giving away your tax base to the cities. And again, that's the danger. And without having a funding source for the provision of services that the county has to provide. And so that's the caveat. From a planning perspective, you're right.
Okay. Sounds like got some interesting
I'm not-
discussions going down.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand that. So if we approve, suppose we put our planning hat on and we approve lots of houses right next to Chico. I guess one thing, Chico would annex,
That's what we're hoping that will happen.
okay, but that wouldn't count towards our net of 10,000 dwelling units that we have to wind up with at the end of 2030.
Right, not for the county's 10,000, right?
Yeah.
Why not?
Because it counts towards Chico's
20,000.
20,000 units. Chico's got to come up with 20,000. They've got room for 10. So they're going to annex 10,000 dwelling
Oh,
units.
I understand where you're coming from
Okay.
in a way. I mean, if the cities are planning for 30 years and we're planning for 30 years, then a lot of our spaces are going to become their space. Yeah,
Right.
that makes sense. But it also makes sense that we should be planning part of our 10,000 to go there too, or to at least be around the cities.
What's
Unless we're planning on doing our own city, creating our own cities. I mean,
Well, I guess that's...
That's a possibility.
Yeah, that is possible. We haven't, that
We have
hasn't
a
come
couple
up yet.
we have an
opportunities.
alternative too, if the cities are going to do it all.
Right.
So what's the fiscal dimension to that?
Just as a simple example is the libraries. So we add, if the city adds 20,000 homes in the city, the county has to improve its library services, provide more services to serve those 20,000 people. And, more staff resources, more hours because there's greater demand, maybe a second library, things like that. What's the funding source for that additional provision of services?
Same would be true for courts and jails, and wouldn't it not? Would it not? You service all the people in the city.
Right. Courts are a little different. They're funded
But they're
differently,
state,
but the jails is a good example, yes. They're booked, they generate crime in the city. They're booked into a county jail. What's the funding source for that cost? Unless there's a revenue sharing agreement that allocates from that new growth a funding source back to the county's going to come up on the short side of that equation. And so the county, in protecting its own interests, I mean, you just saw, a city declare bankruptcy this last week. And I mean, this is getting really tight, and the dollars are going to be very important. And these discussions have to be very honest, frank, open discussions that we've got to figure out how to provide services and fund those services in each jurisdiction.
It's going to happen anyway. I mean, it's going to happen one way or another, though. So the revenue sharing is going to have to be worked out regardless of where this growth occurs.
Well, I
Not
see now,
necessarily.
'cause if
That's
we
okay.
put a new town in the middle of an area that cannot be annexed, then that's a tax base that will stay with the county. I get it.
Yeah, if the auto mall example, locates in the city versus if the auto mall locates in the county, you could see the county and the cities fighting over an auto mall. And this has happened in other jurisdictions where they start doing rebating of sales tax dollars back to an auto dealer because they so eagerly want that tax base. And again, it's a terrible way to plan.
But the county does the county not have a revenue sharing agreement with Chico and the South Chico annexation?
We have an agreement based on a lawsuit that happened over the annexation of the mall years ago, and
North Chico.
North Chico Mall.
Is it only Chico?
North
We have
Chico.
that
We have a different agreement with Orville on property tax sharing. But again, those need to be revisited is the issue. And I think the cities also have some interest in revisiting them or looking at new agreements for new growth. That's the other way to do it. And more likely.
Is there any exchange when we book a city, a person's arrested in the city and booked in our jail, in our county jail? Is there any payback? There's
No,
absolutely no payback.
I don't believe so.
Really? Okay. Certainly needs to be revisited then.
Well, okay, we don't have an agreement, so my question would be mute.
LAFCO is the safety valve for that, but I see it's another political body. Do they impose revenue sharing agreements? Can they when annexations arise?
They work within the general framework of trying to ensure revenue neutrality, but that is often in the eye of the beholder. They typically will concur with agreements as long as both the receiving entity, the city, and the entity that's giving up territory, the county, as long as they agree to something.
As a typical problem, though, the existing land use designation is agriculture, and they're going to annex it and put, industrial or residential on it. So the tax base in the county is very low. When it annexes and grows and it improves, the tax base goes up, but there's no sharing back to the county because it was ag land when it was in the county. So as it became in the city, its land use designation changed, and the city receives that benefit without a revenue sharing agreement.
Plus the fact that by developing it, you increase costs of services that weren't needed when it was in ag.
It's the county supplied services that are the crux. So what are the county supplied services to city land? We've talked about jail, library.
Remember where it
It
is?
wouldn't be sheriff, it wouldn't be
Sometimes I
fire.
think fire does in some
Setting and
instances.
Actually, we have a list of like 40 services in the Setting and Trends report. I don't have that with me right now, but I can get that
Well, I can
during the break.
I can look at it too. Okay.
Where is the revenue sharing agreement going, and how? I mean, are we going to do all this and then just sort of hope it all works out?
I think that you can.
I'd just kind of like to know whether I mean, are
Right.
you talking about these things?
Yes, I think that we're looking to create strategies on how to do good planning and protect the viability of each jurisdiction, the city and the county. And so, and an example of something that I thought was fairly creative that came out of the Citizens Advisory Committee discussion was in the area of Gridley and Biggs, called the Area of Concern, that 2,500 acres or whatever that is in between the two jurisdictions. And the cities are asking for an urban reserve overlay. And a strategy might be that urban reserve overlay is held in place for a certain period of time while revenue sharing is negotiated between the two cities and the county. And at such point in time, whether that's 3 years or 4 years or something like that, 5 years or 1 year, it serves as a tool to incentivize the revenue sharing process. Because we can't probably achieve revenue sharing agreements in the frame of the next year and a half of completing the general plan. But you could put a policy that says this would expire after 3 years and go and remain in ag land. And so you create some sort of an incentive for the jurisdictions to cooperate. That's just one idea that's come up, and I don't know if that's viable or not.
Would special districts be useful? I mean, I know you can set up a special district for just about anything, in some of these things where the county figures that they're not going to come out with any revenue out of the deal, but they're going to end up with a negative cash flow. Could they demand that a special district be set up and put that in the special district?
I think that's sort of the bargaining chip, in a sense, that the county has in the discussion. And that comes up, frankly, in the Orville area, where we do have sewer and water districts that are not in the city. You know, we have Low Pud and South Feather water. So you can have urban level development, as you're aware of, in the county that will not be annexed probably to the city for many, many, many years. And so the threat, if you will, in negotiations is that the county could develop. The county could develop a project in between Gridley and Biggs, set up its own districts, and form water and sewer districts and provide all the services in between the two cities, create a tax base for itself. And, you know, you would say to yourself, is that good planning? Probably not, no. But you have property owners, for example, that may want to do that. So, again, that's where this all kind of comes together.
I think Carol's got an idea. What if you have, say you have a choice parcel right next to Chico, and the concern is that would be the planning hat on, that'd be the place to develop. Fiscal hat on, it's bad because you lose your tax base. So you form a special use district, 40 of them, one for each one of the county provides services that goes to that piece of ground. Then when it's annexed, the services district survives the annexation, and the funding source still goes directly to the county.
I think the difference is that the one vision of how the development would occur, the development would not occur in the county. It would occur under the city's authority on these properties that would be annexed. But again, we have a study area that's right on the fringes of Chico, off of the Skyway. And that's a very interesting study area because it really, the city could develop it, the county, it could develop in the county. And I think that it'll be interesting to see how you discuss that and what conclusions you draw for that area and what ideas you come up with to solve the problem that we can't solve. So we look forward to your wisdom.
I have one more question. We have the numbers of how many you may need in the next 20 or 30 years, but is there anything similar to phasing a project so that you don't build 20 years worth of structures all in Chico in 5 years?
The only discussion I'm aware of is the idea of spheres, like having a 5-year sphere, a 10-year sphere, a 20-year sphere around cities. And the concept there would be around, for example, the city of Chico, or city of Orville might be a better example. You would draw a 5-year sphere which would be closer to the core of the city and say that, you know, X number of development should occur within that 5-year sphere before you go out into the 10-year sphere. And, you know, maybe it's 75% or 80%. And the idea there is to focus the growth in the urban area. And other jurisdictions, other counties and cities have used that approach. But that's something we need to coordinate with the cities and with LAFCO.
And then maybe in 5 years have some sort of a review of how you're meeting the numbers and the areas and how it's developing?
Yes.
Any other questions or comments? Well, we're very close to break time here. Before we open up to public input, why don't we take about a 15-minute break?